r/AskReddit. What do you consider the biggest threat to humanity? Ourselves. We have come so close in the last 70 years to absolutely obliterating the surface of the earth with nuclear arms. Who knows what will happen when things like oil, fresh water, and food get low enough that people start fighting over it worldwide. Greed. If Earth never united, which it probably won't, we will never be able to escape this world. We will run out of energy and materials or straight up kill each other. The building of something like a fusion swarm or sphere is our biggest chance to become a Type 2 civilization, yet we are stuck at a Type 1.75 because we can't get past the desire for power and money on our local planet. Large corporations buying politicians. So many of our politicians, USA, are bought by large corporations that even if you get a politician that's not willing to cooperate with being paid off, they get shut down and swept under the rug by the majority. Defense, big pharma, social media companies, oil, all of it. They're all social engineering all of us to hate each other to cover up the real problem, which is them and corrupt politicians. Distances in space. If the sun was a basketball in NYC, the nearest other star is a tennis ball in Brazil. If the nearest other star was 1 mile from you, humanity's furthest probe went 4 inches. Humanity sent people only a single millimeter. Government. This is the correct answer. It encompasses political, nuclear, ecological, economic, and social aspects, because the officials pulling the strings affect all those fields drastically. The solution, perhaps, is returning the basis of power to the people. Government has to return to being a service, not a policy dictator/enforcer. I sound like an old man, but technology. I believe the science says our brains have evolved less than 10% in the last 1,000 years. Now many of us don't even have to leave the house for any basic necessities. We live in boxes, with artificial light, eat processed food, rarely do anything physical, some barely go outside, and many of us have no social interactions outside of the internet. We're fucked long term. Massive solar flare. Cascading failures across an industrialized country's electric grid are very hard to repair quickly. In the US, electric grid are a mishmash of stuff cobbled together since before the 1950s. Dinner of the replacement parts need to be custom made in workshops that need electricity. Something like this would probably not make humanity extinct, but could crumble our civilization as we know it. Climate change and humanity's total unwillingness to accept and deal with it. Every IPCC report is worse than the last, and yet the vast majority of nations on the planet continuously do Dickie McGee sacks. We have less than 9 years left to handle our shit, and with each passing year, the bare minimum solution becomes more and more radical. Seriously, you think the Green New Deal is extreme now? Just wait for the legislation that will have to be drafted in 2024. Capitalism is easily the greatest threat. It encourages selection and empowerment of some of the most short-sighted tactics and individuals. It encourages decreasing longevity of living conditions. It causes the massive destruction of the environment via deforestation, fracking, polluting the oceans. It leads to the degradation of various industries by warping them to accrue and serve profit, medicine, education, politics, weapon creation. It is a major attribute that leads to improvements in various fields, but it is the bigger, consume, more force that leads to so many problems. Anti-nuclear hysteria. We have the technology to entirely fix climate change permanently while making no real changes to our way of life. We had this technology in the 1950s in fact. Had we gone all in on this technology, it's likely we wouldn't even know what climate change is today. Furthermore, I would argue that it is in fact the only extant technology capable of actually solving the problems we face with climate change. Renewables can never generate enough power reliably enough to serve as anything but supplements. However, we are not allowed to use it not because of any fault of the technology. It is, in fact, the safest method of power generation ever devised, but rather because people don't understand it and don't want to. Bafflingly, so many of the so-called green movements are also anti-nuclear. The same people who recognize the enormity of the problem are vehemently against us actually solving it, preferring some nebulous fairy magic instead. The anti-nuclear movement may have actually killed the world. Capitalism. Climate change, pandemic mismanagement, deteriorating living standards in major cities, more and more precarious work, it's all precluded by the contradictions of our capitalistic system. We must seek international solidarity with workers and bourgeois allies to cast aside this redundant and inhumane system. Climate change. And we're fucked. Capitalists and fascists won. It will be impossible to make worldwide changes in time. Capitalism, or more accurately human greed, which has created the capitalist system. While many great achievements have occurred through the successes of capitalism, We are now facing the very beginning of extinction through climate change. The causes of climate change are greatly exacerbated by capitalist ideals and practices, and the only way to prevent some of these problems from occurring is to ignore profit and material gain for many years in order to restructure the way our world works. Energy production can no longer rely on burning fossil fuel, for example, but the trillion-dollar oil and natural gas industry will never ever allow that to happen. I worry for my future children and their children. The next generation is going to have a lot of cleaning up to do if they even want a slim chance of survival. I have hope that many people recognize the severity of these problems, and I truly believe that those of us who want to make a change will have the opportunity to do so eventually, myself included. It just takes all of us working together for the betterment of humanity, not working independently to fuel personal greed and material wealth. In no particular order: a hostile AI singularity, solar flare EMP, asteroids, Mississippi, runaway irreversible climate change, global economic hyperinflation, the malfusion trap, and thermonuclear war. Oh, and social collapse to the extent that our nuclear reactors can't be safely maintained. Blind faith. Not religious faith. Any blind faith where an individual ignores his/her own consciousness and morals to blindly follow what another being tells him/her. Examples include and are not limited to capitalism/communism, religion, political parties, local communities, even families. We should all have a set of morals and have each word we hear go through that filter. Climate change. We're going to have massive problems in my life. I dread to think what kind of world my kids will be living in when they're grown up. Edit. Lots are asking why I would have kids. Rather than respond to each of them, I'll answer you all here. Our kids weren't born yesterday. We decided to have kids about 6 to 7 years ago. Back then, Donald Trump was a reality TV host and businessman. The US might flip between Democrat and Republican, but both were fairly centrist, by USA standards. Jair Bolsonaro was climbing his way up to power and I'd never heard the name. He's now burning more rainforests than anyone ever before. Boris Johnson was the clown mayor of London and there was no way he'd get near actual power. The EU referendum was on the way, but there was no way the UK would vote leave. The latest IPCC report was that some warming would happen, but if we all took notice now we could limit warming to around 1 to 1.5 degrees. Eco-diesels were a thing. I bought one based on the lower carbon emissions. Seriously, fuck you VW and any other car manufacturers who have done similar things. Everyone should watch the Dirty Money episode about the emissions scandal, it's on Netflix. The world isn't angry enough about this. Offshore wind had become cheaper per kilowatt hour than nuclear. We were on the cusp of a green energy revolution. The world really has gone to shit in the last few years. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Short-term, geopolitics. Long-term, oceanic eco-collapse. Short-sightedness and selfishness. Most people can't project/contemplate more than a decade or so in the future, let alone several generations past their own lives. I think this is part of the reason religions first came to be, as a way to encourage a lifestyle that made sure you left the world in a better place/had a positive impact on your community and future generations. Human selfishness and ego has always been an issue. The only difference is that now there's so many of us and we're so advanced and interconnected that our selfishness is putting the future of all civilizations at risk. That the metastasis of the cancer of willful ignorance being celebrated as a strength rather than the weakness that it is. Remember folks, if nobody voted for the corrupt and or stupid, they wouldn't hold public office. Without the voters, the incompetent and or compromised would be elected to one term and one term only. My favorite Edward Bernays quote: "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society, in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking. We are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." Edward Bernays, Propaganda. Humanity will go on even after the collapse of government in small self-governed groups. The biggest threat would be a catastrophic global mass extinction event probably caused by the weakening of Earth's magnetic field, which allows radiation to penetrate the atmosphere and wreak havoc on DNA. Not to mention the numerous seismic shifts and increased activity which leads to more natural disasters, etc., etc. Global capitalism as it exists right now. A system that incentivizes the abuse of finite natural resources, poisons or destroys the environment, leaves billions destitute, and perpetuates itself. The current system is almost certainly going to lead to the end of our lives as we know them. The climate is already changing in ways we can't take back, and climate change functions in a positive feedback loop. Things are already going to get worse. Anything we do right now decides how much worse. Cognitive dissonance. Humanity has the means to solve any problem we face. But we are disjointed and disillusioned that opinions are facts and that as long as someone else is to blame it's alright if all we do is point fingers while everything around us falls apart. No one is different from you at their core. We all want to be happy, secure, and feel a part of the world around us. Stop punching down.